especially on such short notice. It's been 50 years since the CPS was founded, and in the wake of a Conservative election defeat, to provide fresh thinking for the centre-right and for our country in general, one of those founders would rapidly become the first woman leader of the Conservative Party. She would usher in a political and ideological revolution that transformed first the Tories and then the country, winning general election after general election. So no pressure then, Kemi. In all seriousness, I'm delighted to welcome the Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Home Secretary for what I believe is their first major policy announcement of their tenures, and it's an announcement on a hugely important area. As I hope you all know, the CPS focuses its work on policies that make a real difference in people's lives. Growth, tax, infrastructure, energy, housing, and so on. In fact, one of the very first papers that I edited on taking this job was by a promising young MP called Chris Philp, so it's a great delight to have him here today. But in recent years, the CPS has also led the way in analysing the scale of post-Brexit migration, its changing composition, and its wider impacts, not least its impact on the demand for housing. Our research team, led by the brilliant Carl Williams, have made the argument for reforming our system of border control and ensuring that we really do focus on bringing in those who can make the greatest contribution to our country. So I'm very pleased, proud and honoured to welcome to the stage the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, and the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tomorrow, immigration figures will be released that should show a drop in net migration. This is because of the changes we made in the last year of the Conservative government. The figures we saw for 2023 were astonishing. They highlighted a big problem we must be honest about. Even if we see a decline in tomorrow's data, the fact is immigration, both legal and illegal, is too high. Migration affects all of our lives in different ways. It certainly affected mine, and that is why I am happy to speak about it without fear. I believe our country is a beacon of light that shines all over the world, a place of security, opportunity, and prosperity, where people are treated equally. Millions want to come here, but we as politicians have to do right by the citizens of this country before anyone else. Our country cannot sustain the numbers we have seen. We are reducing the quality of life for people already here because immigration is at a pace too fast to maintain public services, and at a rate where it is next to impossible to integrate those from radically different cultures. It is time to tell the truth. For decades, the entire political class in this country has presided over mass migration. Since 1994, every year has seen more people arrive in this country than leave. Numbers climbed and climbed. During the last Conservative administration, we promised to bring numbers down. We did not deliver that promise. We ended free movement, but the system that replaced it is not working. Some of the increase in migration was for humanitarian reasons that few would disagree with, taking in refugees from Ukraine and British overseas nationals from Hong Kong. But that was not the whole story. We may have tried to control numbers, but overall, we did not deliver. Under my leadership, we are learning from our mistakes, and it is time for a new approach. We need to change. Let's break it down. First, if immigration is too quick, there is no integration. The ties that bind us start to fray. It doesn't matter whether you are massively for immigration or massively against it, without a shared national identity, our country will suffer. When people come here, they must buy into the values, customs, and institutions that attracted them here in the first place. Second, the political class cannot pretend that immigration comes only with benefits and no costs. When we can all see the pressure on housing, roads, GPs, and wages, we must be honest. The failure of politics over the last 30 years has been to gloss over it or make it a fringe issue. That has to stop. Third, we can no longer be naive. It's nonsense that we have allowed a situation where judges deem safe countries to be unsafe, where loopholes are willfully exploited by opportunists, where the latest legal ruses and wheezes are sent around the world on social media. Now, as I have said, tomorrow's figures will likely show a reduction in net immigration, and no doubt the new government will try to take credit for that reduction, but that change is due to the reforms that the Conservatives made in our final months in power. For example, over the last 18 months, income thresholds for work visas increased by 50%. Restrictions were placed on care workers and students bringing family members into the country. Labour may criticise our record on immigration, but remember, throughout the last 14 years, the Labour Party were urging us to relax controls on immigration. Even though those figures tomorrow are likely to be a start in the right direction, it's not enough. We remain a world away from where we need to be. Labour won't get us there. Under a Labour government, immigration will remain far too high. We are already seeing the signs. For example, the last Conservative government committed to increasing the income threshold which a family must earn to bring relatives to the UK. This reform alone was estimated to cut net migration dramatically, but the Labour government has suspended that change. The Home Secretary wants a returns agreement with the EU, but that's the exact kind of agreement that saw us take more asylum seekers than were returned to the continent. So Labour won't change anything. The Prime Minister himself once said that there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration law. And of course, he and his cabinet fought against the end of free movement. They scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started. And we are already seeing the inevitable result as more and more people cross the channel, with significantly more arriving than last year. Labour have no serious plan for ending illegal migration. As the former head of the Border Force has pointed out, enforcement on its own will never solve the problem. People know that if they can make it to the UK, they will be able to stay. We must end that. The result of Labour's policies will be consistently high illegal immigration throughout this Parliament and insufficient action on legal migration. But we are not in government now. We are the opposition, and our role now is to hold the government to account. Our government's primary responsibility must be to its own citizens. Yes, economists sometimes argue that immigration can increase a country's wealth, but they are not thinking about the effect on individual people. In government, there's little detailed analysis about the impact of different types of immigration on living standards or on wage levels. There's even less analysis on the pressure on public services or housing or the welfare system as a result of mass migration. Sometimes there's even a squeamishness about discussing the negative aspects of immigration. This is not just a question of money, it's a question of fairness. And perhaps most importantly, most British citizens don't want to change what's good about our country. Even those who have recently arrived don't want to change these things. They came here because of what our country is, a secure and free society. Most people want to preserve that. So we need a new approach. We will not accept the claim that we can only deliver growth by accepting mass migration. We need a new approach which will mean that young people can build their lives in a country which does not have these pressures on housing and public services. And a new approach that starts by asking why government doesn't seem to be able to deliver that. The answer is because the system is broken. And until you accept that, any politician, all politicians are doomed to fail. We have to get the diagnosis right. So, we will review every policy, treaty, and part of our legal framework, including the ECHR and the Human Rights Act. And in designing our detailed policies, we will put the following elements at the core. A strict numerical cap, with visas only for those who will make a substantial and clear overall contribution. A fully transparent approach, publishing all the data, so that for the first time, everyone can see the real costs and benefits of different types of migration. A reconsidered approach to citizenship and settlement, making the path to a British passport a privilege to be earned, not an automatic right. Zero tolerance for foreign criminals remaining in the UK. And, of course, an effective deterrent for illegal migration. Overall, our plans will look at all immigration routes, family, study, asylum and work, and at all ways people can enter the UK. We will look at the access of migrants and any dependents to welfare and public services. And we will need to improve the data and economic modelling that decision makers rely on. But I want to end on something very simple. We can argue about the effects of migration on the economy, we can discuss the impact on public services and housing, and we haven't done that enough. But fundamentally, this country is not a dormitory or a hotel. It is our home. We need to look after it. I want to rebuild the trust between the Conservative Party and the British people. I know we have a lot of work to do, but the first step is to accept that mistakes were made and to learn from them. As the new party leader, I want to acknowledge that we made mistakes. Yes, some of these problems are long-standing. This is a collective failure of political leaders from all parties over decades. But on behalf of the Conservative Party, it is right that I, as the new leader, accept responsibility and say truthfully, we got this wrong. I more than understand the public anger on this issue. I share it. The Conservatives will develop a detailed plan for immigration to put before the British public before the next election. They will have a clear choice: the policies of Labour, which are doomed to fail, or a new, coherent plan. It's time to tell the truth on immigration. And over the coming months, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Kemi, for that. Let me start by saying, as the new Shadow Home Secretary, that over decades, under successive governments, immigration has been far too high. Since 2010, net migration added 3.7 million people to our population. That is more than the population of the whole of Wales. It is the equivalent of 8 cities the size of Liverpool. Annual net migration has recently exceeded 700,000 and gross arrival numbers reached 1.2 million. Immigration at this scale is not acceptable, and the public agrees. 64% think immigration is too high, just 6% think immigration is too low. And Professor Brian Bell, the chair of the Independent Migration Advisory Committee, described recent levels of immigration as, and I quote, unsustainable. Professor Bell is right. High immigration has placed huge strain on housing, with net migration creating demand for 120,000 new homes per year. Public services like healthcare, education and transport are under strain. But it matters for our society too. Because for a nation to succeed, we need to be united in our values and share a sense of national identity and culture. And the truth is, this is undermined when large-scale immigration occurs, especially without integration. Speaking honestly, I am troubled that over 1 million people in the UK, over 1 million people, can't speak English either well or at all. For some nationalities, adult workforce participation is at or below 50%, with even more stark differences for women. In some parts of London, over 1/3 of the population is relatively newly arrived, and in one part of East London, 73% of school children do not speak English as a first language. Now, these are real issues caused by high immigration without integration. Now, you often hear people, including government bodies, saying that we need immigration for workers and for economic growth. But the truth is, the vast majority of recent arrivals did not come here to work. Only 15%, just 1 in 7 of non-EU visas in the last 5 years were issued primarily for work purposes. And even there, for every worker who arrived, on average they brought an extra dependent along with them. Huge numbers of visas were issued for study and for family, with only a minority of those ending up in work. And even for those who were in work, they were often earning very low wages. In 2022-23, around half of those who arrived on worker visa routes were earning barely more than the minimum wage. And 68% of migrants here working, 68% earned less than median earnings. And this should concern us because recent OBR analysis showed that low-wage migrant workers are fiscally negative. That means they cost other taxpayers more than they contribute for every single year of their life. Now, of course, we should welcome limited numbers of high-skilled workers who contribute financially or who fill genuine skill gaps. Research scientists in financial services, in technology, medicine, engineering, we like engineers, and in advanced manufacturing. This can work for us. But mass low-skilled migration actually reduces productivity and makes public finances worse. So, rather than businesses reaching for large numbers of cheap migrant workers to fill low-skilled vacancies, we want those businesses instead to invest more in cutting-edge labour-saving technology and mechanisation. And our competitor economies, places like Australia, like South Korea and Singapore, are doing this already in sectors from agriculture to construction to healthcare, and we in the UK can do the same. Now, it's also very relevant that over 9 million adults are economically inactive. That is an increase of around 10%, an increase of 850,000 since the pandemic. So businesses urgently need to recruit those people back into the workforce instead of importing low-wage migrant workers. And the government needs to make sure those people have the right skills and that the benefit system is toughened up to incentivise work. Now, as Kemi said, there is one thing we know for sure in all this. We can't trust Labour on immigration. They have already suspended the last Conservative government's measures to further tighten up the rules around legal migration that had been due to come into force in April of next year. Almost as soon as they were elected, they cancelled the Rwanda deterrent before it had even started, leading to a 23% increase in small boat crossings since the election compared to the same time last year. And in opposition, Labour voted 134 times against measures to toughen up on illegal migration, including voting against tougher prison sentences for the people smuggling gangs they claim to want to smash. And Labour MPs and ministers now seem reluctant to talk much about immigration at all. The truth is, they don't have the answers. Now, by contrast, Conservatives in government did take some steps to reduce net migration, and as Kemi said, we may see the early effects of that in tomorrow's figures. But it is also true that we need to go much further and take tougher measures, as Kemi set out a few minutes ago. And those tougher measures will include a hard cap on numbers and zero tolerance for illegal migration. So with a new leader, the Conservatives will develop a new approach. We will now take the time needed to develop a carefully thought-through plan that we know will work. It'll be a plan that will deliver what the British people are asking for. And now I think there are some questions from the media with us today, I believe starting with Joe Pike from the BBC, who I can see, I think, lurking by the screen at the back.
Joe Pike, BBC News. Two things, Kemi Badenoch. Firstly, you talked about providing an effective deterrent. Is it still your party's policy to reintroduce the Rwanda scheme? And secondly, you'll have heard at PMQ's Keir Starmer not rule out a law to ban criticism of profits. What's your take on possible blasphemy laws?
Okay. So on the deterrent, we still believe that a deterrent is necessary as part of a proper immigration policy. And it is not just us that thinks this. You know, Ursula von der Leyen has said that offshore processing is going to be required. Now, we don't know where we're going to be in 4 years' time. It may be that there have been changes between what the Rwandan government was offering that we put out, but we certainly still want a deterrent. We would not have cancelled the Rwanda plan before it had even got started like Labour did. And I'm against blasphemy laws.
Yeah, and on the deterrent point, the National Crime Agency have said that you need a deterrent in order to stop the boats. Simply law enforcement alone, although it's important, and of course it was happening under the previous government, that alone will not work. And that is why we've seen that 23% increase year on year in small boat crossings since the election. It's because the deterrent was cancelled before it even started. And as Kemi said, the Labour government are out of step with where the rest of the world is heading, with even Ursula von der Leyen calling for offshore processing. OK, I think next we have Chris Hope from GB News.
Thank you, Chris Philp. Kemi Badenoch, you said there you got it wrong on immigration. Chris Philp said we can't trust Labour on immigration. But why on earth should voters trust either of you two or your entire party for completely cocking up controlling net migration for the past 14 years? Why would you say today, for example, that the firm cap will be fewer than 100,000 arrivals a year?
So we're not setting out numbers because you've got to build that into a full plan. What we have set out today is a framework for how we're going to be carrying out our immigration policy and how we are going to be holding Labour to account. It's not good enough just to complain about what they're doing. We have to explain why it is the wrong way of going about things. But you asked, why should people trust us? To earn back trust, you need to acknowledge where you got things wrong. And we are acknowledging today that while we may have tried, we did not deliver. We brought in a points-based system, which I personally thought was going to only allow skilled migrants in, and instead it allowed a lot of people at low incomes and with dependents. So we are going to change that. But we want people to know that we recognise their frustration, and in many cases, certainly in mine, we share it. Thank you.
Great, so next is Steve from The Times, Steve Swinford.
Do you still see leaving the ECHR as an easy answer, or is that something you're more open to now? I know you spoke about reviewing the roles of different regulations, and the ECHR is part of that.
I have always said that leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet. It's not even the most radical thing that we probably will have to do. But if we're going to leave the ECHR, we need to have a plan, not just a promise. There is a lot more that is going on in our immigration system beyond the ECHR. And what I don't want to do is what has happened before, where politicians make promises quickly to get votes and then things aren't delivered. What you are going to see from us is a new approach, principles and policy based on a plan.
Yeah. And our detailed work will include reviewing the status and operation of the ECHR. That is part of the scope of our work that will be taking place. Jason Groves from the Mail.
Thanks very much. A couple of things. Are you really willing to contemplate removing the access of migrants to the benefit system? What are you going to do about people who won't integrate? And what is the most radical thing that you think you're going to do?
That was 3 questions, Jason. So yes, when it comes to benefits, we need to look again at how our system is structured so that we make sure that it is fair. It is about fairness. We have to look after the people who are in this country, the British citizens first. Our welfare system is not an international welfare system. And we have organised it in such a way that other people are able to take advantage of it in an unaffordable manner. We've got to look at what we are spending on welfare in its entirety. So what I'm saying to people today is that, yes, we acknowledge that mistakes have been made, but we're now going to take the time to work through how we can do this as quickly as possible, how we can bring numbers down to a much more manageable level. We still want good people to come to our country. We are an amazing place. It's no surprise that millions of people want to come here, but we have to look after what we have. We cannot just take it for granted that things are always going to be okay and that it doesn't matter and that we don't need to look at how integration works. Now, what I'm not doing is setting out a full-on integration plan. That's what we're going to be doing over the coming months and years. But I think that when we do have it, the British public will like it.
Great, thank you. Amy Lewis from ITV.
Thank you. I mean, you've talked about getting things wrong, but isn't it just a case that you're saying all of this because of the rise of reform and you've lost so many voters from them and you need to address that before the general election?
Well, I think it's important that when you have new leadership, you set out what the new approach is. Obviously, if we were still in government, then we'd be saying something different. Perhaps the British public did like the previous policy. But I can say, hand on heart, that I share the frustrations of the British public and in many cases, their anger. We need to fix this. The system is broken. We can't just ignore it and pretend that the problem will solve itself. And what I am worried about is that Labour will assume that because they've won, people like their immigration policy. Because people voted reform, we have now got a Labour government. However, I think that there is a dissonance between what people want, which is lower and better migration, and what Labour is offering. You look at what they have done since they came in, they haven't set out anything meaningful on immigration. A few slogans here and there about smashing the gangs. I think they had a press conference when they arrested one person, for example. This is not serious.
Great, thank you, Amy. So I'm going to turn now to Tamara Cohen from Sky.
Thank you, Tamara Cohen, Sky News. previous Tory leaders had a migration cap of tens of thousands and they never met it, which didn't help with trust in politics. How would your cap be different? How could people have faith it would be deliverable? And how would your zero tolerance policy for illegal migration work if people were crossing the channel from genuine war zones?
Okay, I'll let Chris take the second half on a zero tolerance policy. But why did the previous caps not work? My view is that there was an assumption that simply stating a number and was enough, and then hoping that things would work themselves out. What we will do now is explain how you will get to those numbers, not just stating the numbers. We are moving beyond rhetoric. I'm not somebody who just talks. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. Before we say things, we have to have a proper plan about how we deliver them. Chris?
Yeah, well, on the cap, we'll make sure that is a cap that bites. Of course, when the coalition government talked about a cap, we were part of the European Union, and free movement meant that that was in practice not something in the government's control at the time. We're clearly in a different position now, having left. On the question about illegal migration, or criminals in particular, we want to make sure that where someone has committed a criminal offence, so-called foreign national offenders, they are always removed to their country of origin. We need to use powers like visa sanctions to make sure that their country of origin or their country of nationality actually accept them back, which in some cases is a problem. And we need to make sure that some legislative obstacles are cleared away. So, for example, very often, bogus modern slavery claims are made in relation to foreign national offenders, and yet in the ECAT Treaty, the European Convention Against Trafficking, there is a public order exemption that means we could still return foreign criminals. On the question of illegal migration more widely, what it means is we need a deterrent that will ensure people who come here illegally are removed. If they're from a safe country, they'll be removed to their country of origin, their country of nationality. If that is not a safe country, we will need to find somewhere else they can be removed to, which obviously was Rwanda, but we will need either that or something equivalent to it. And as both Kemi and I have said, that is a direction of travel that even the European Commission, even Ursula von der Leyen, is now signalling. She wrote to European member states in October saying they should look at offshore processing. That's slightly different to Rwanda, but it's similar in principle. And yet here we have a Labour government going in the opposite direction and presiding over increased small boat numbers coming across the channel. So I think we now move to Nick Gutteridge from The Telegraph.
Thank you. At the back here. On a slightly different topic, the French government today has said that it would not arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he travelled to France. Do you think the UK government should follow suit, and what do you make of their decision basically not to say what they'd do?
Well, I think it's wrong that the government won't say what it will do. Our Shadow Attorney General has already written and set out what our policy is on this subject. But today I'm mostly focused on migration.
OK, there we are. And the last question goes to Jack Elsom from The Sun.
Thank you very much. Just on the deterrence point, you said that lots of countries are looking at offshore processing. Is it still your ambition to have a deportation scheme like Rwanda rather than just offshore processing, which you acknowledge was different? And secondly, Ms. Badenoch, before you've talked about how civil servants in the Home Office are thwarting plans to get immigration down, how would you get the Home Office machine to stomach your changes?
Well, should I take the first question first? So on the model, I do think that the Rwanda model, which is sometimes called outsourcing, is a better model because it means that everybody is removed out of the jurisdiction, regardless of whether their asylum claim is valid or not. Whereas on the offshoring processing model, which is what Italy is currently trying to do with Albania, although is receiving challenges, is different. That's where if the person gets the claim accepted, they can come back to the country they went to. I think that is not as good as the Rwanda model, because the Rwanda model means everybody, regardless of the validity of their claim, ends up in that third safe country. And for the deterrent to be fully effective, I think that is what you need. So offshoring is better than nothing, but I think the Rwanda model is even better than that.
Thank you, Jack. So on that question, I've been very clear that I do think we need to look at culture as well. When I wrote my first op-ed on migration, I said that numbers matter, that culture matters more, and leadership is what ties it all together. And that culture isn't just about the cultures of people coming to our country. It's also about the internal culture that we have in the system, the culture in Whitehall. There are many good people in the Home Office, but I think we need to change the culture. There are also a lot of people who are there who would much rather be working in a charity helping people with asylum, helping refugees. We've seen senior director generals, for instance, leave the Home Office to go to Amnesty International. The Home Office is not a charity, and we need to make sure that we are recruiting for it to do the job that it is meant to do, which is controlling borders.
Right, well, I think that concludes the questions. So just a word to say thank you to those people who joined us. This is the beginning of a conversation and the beginning of the policy development that will happen in the coming months and years.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.